Hey everybody and welcome. This week we're going to be talking about classless internet domain routing, or CIDR. So as the original version of the internet, or DARPA, got going between a bunch of universities and military bases, those that were responsible for the thing saw that a lot of people wanted access and they were getting a lot of requests, and it was quickly growing in popularity. And they realized that if things continued to grow like that, they would probably run out of addresses in a short time. Because remember, at this point we were all using classical addresses. So, some incredibly math-blessed person came up with the idea of stealing bits from the subnet mask to increase the number of networks allowed. So, this process is now known as subnetting, and we take one big network and we break it down into many smaller networks. Now, luckily, whenever IPv6 comes into play, this all goes away. The problem is this will never all go away because there will be some people that don't want to change. They don't want to learn about IPv6, so they'll stay with IPv4 forever, especially internally on their networks. And they can do that because even if the rest of the world goes to IPv6, there are tunneling protocols that still allow you to convert your IPv6 address at your border into an IPv4 address internally. So sadly, this is probably never going to go away. So how is this done? Let me give an example of subnetting. Let's say you own a business and you have purchased a Class C address from your ISP. And your Class C address is 200.100.50.0 with a /24. So you're going to use that at your location and you only have 50 employees. So the cost of those addresses is about $25 each per month on your bill. So if you have 254 usable addresses you can use, and so you're paying for 204 extra addresses per month. So think about the cost of that. That's $5,100 you're wasting per month. All right, so let's say you don't care about paying for the extra addresses, but later on you buy out a business down the street that has 100 employees. Do you buy a whole nother Class C address range, or you just split up what you have? Well, of course, obviously business says, let's just split it up. So we steal one bit in the subnet mask for the network. So we take one of the zeros and we turn it into a 1. And now our subnet mask becomes a /25. So in binary, our subnet mask would be all ones, all ones, all ones, and then 1, and then 7 zeros. So it would come out to 255, 255, 255, 128. So we steal zeros and change them into ones, or you can say we steal from the host portion to increase the network portion. Remember, ones are network portion, zeros are host portion. So if I steal a single bit from the host portion, that gives me 2 usable addresses. Well, what do those usable addresses look like? What are those 2 different networks that it gives me? Well, here's a range chart that shows you. So today I'm going to show you how to easily create a range chart to kind of figure out any possible question that they ask you. So like they might give you an address and they say, hey, based on this address, what's the first usable, what's the last usable in my range, what's the network ID, what's the broadcast, what's the third usable, and if you just knock out a range chart real quick, you can answer all those questions. So let me cover the columns in the range chart. The very first column here, this is the network ID. This is not given to any PCs. This is what the routers use to identify a network. Remember, routers route towards an entire network, not a usable IP address. If a router had to route to each usable IP address, it would just be silly. There's no way you could do that because there are way more usable addresses. All right, and then you get the first usable address in your range. In this case, this would be 50.1. Then you get the last usable address in the range, which would be 50.126. And then you get the broadcast. Now, this can also not be used on a PC. This broadcast goes out to everybody in this network. So I'm pretty sure you guys by now have talked about collision domains and broadcast domains. Well, that's how you would send out a broadcast. And broadcasts stay within their network because a router that would have to connect the 2 different networks or multiple networks blocks broadcast by default. So by changing the first 0 to a 1, we reduce the number of hosts, but we increase the number of networks. And as we steal more bits, it becomes more and more prominent. So by default, a Class C address will give you 254 usable addresses. But if we steal 1 from the host, then we get 2 networks, but then we get 2, each network only supports 126 hosts. So then we've reduced the number of usable IP addresses to 252 instead of 254 because we've converted that. So you get the idea. All right, so let me show you how to create these range charts because they're crazy easy. So there's two formulas. Now normally in books or documentation, it's always 2 to the x and 2 to the x minus 2, and it's always 2 to the x. So you have no idea like when am I switching x, when is x this and when is x that. So I tend to use x and y. So 2 to the x is the number of networks you can create, and 2 to the y minus 2 is the number of hosts you can have. Now, x is the number of ones that you add to the default subnet mask, and y is the number of zeros in the subnet mask. And this is the only math you have to do. Remember, so x is the number of ones added to the default subnet mask, so it's just the powers of 2. And y is the number of zeros in the subnet mask. We know the subnet mask is always 32, so 32 minus the number of zeros gives us the number of ones. So very basic math, powers of 2 and basic subtraction, and you're all set. All right, so let me show you how this works. So I have 200.100.50.0/24. It's a Class C address. There's 24 ones in the subnet mask. If we use the network formula to break it into 2 networks, we want 2 networks, so we have to solve the network formula. So we get 2 to the x equals 2. Remember, it's 2 to the x equals number of networks. We want 2 networks, so they've given us, we know the formula, and then they've given us the answer. We just have to figure out what x is. So that's an easy one. So 2 to the 1 equals 2. So we add 1 to the subnet mask. Remember, x is the number of ones we have to add to the default subnet mask. So we change the subnet mask to a /25 or blah, 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 blah. So same thing for host. So this gives us /25, but what about host? Remember, a subnet mask always has 32 bits, and IPv4 address always has 32 bits. So if we have a 32-bit subnet mask and 25 of them are ones, we know that there are 7 zeros. So then we just plug that 7 into the y formula. So 2 to the y, or 2 to the 7, minus 2 gives us 126. Now, why do we minus 2? Well, we minus 2 because we're going to lose the address at the first and the address at the back. So for the one for the network ID and one for the broadcast. So that's why we number 2 to figure out the number of hosts. And if you do this math, so we have 126 usable addresses. And if you remember from that range chart I just showed you, that we had 126 usable addresses. So it's that simple. Now, to make the range chart, though, we just take the 2 to the y part and we skip the minus 2. And that gives us the range. So 2 to the y in our case is 2 to the 7, which is 128. So we start with 0 and we keep adding 128 all the way down until you hit 256. You will always hit 256. If you don't hit 256, your math is wrong. So I start at 0 and then I add the range, 128. And then I add the range. So 128 plus 128 is 256. So again, you will always end at 256. Now, that's the left side of my chart. If I just subtract 1 from 256, I get 255, and that fills in the right side of my chart. If I subtract 1 from 128, I get 127. So that's the right side of my chart. So now we've filled in the chart like this, we can just pop in the middle. So we have 0, we add 1, and which some 0, 1, and then 127 minus 1 would be 126. So 0, 1 through 126, 127 is the broadcast. So it's that easy to pop that in. Now, once you have that in, remember when we're dealing with Class Cs, only the 4th octet changes. So we can slap in the 200.100.50 because that always stays the same, and we just put that in the front, and we have our range chart. Boom. Now that you've knocked that out, you can say, hey, what is the 4th usable in the 2nd subnet? Well, if it's 129 is the first usable, 130, 131, 132. So 200.100.50.132 would be the 4th usable in the 2nd subnet. What's the broadcast of the first subnet? 200.150.127. So again, once you have that range chart, it's easy to knock the rest of that stuff out. All right, so let's do another one. Wow, that really should have spelled that correctly. So let's say you start out with 192.168.100.0/24, and they tell you you need to split it into 4 networks. Well, if they're telling you you need to split it into 4 networks, you know you need to use the network formula. So it's going to be 2 to the x equals 4, because you need to come out with 4 networks. So now we just have to solve this, 2 to the x equals 4. Well, again, as long as you know the powers of 2 of just a few, you just need to know 2 to the 1, 2 to the 2, 2 to the 3, 2 to the 4, kind of, because you can only go 2 to the 8. That's the max you could possibly have. But really, we're only going to go to 2 to 6. Anyway, so I digress. So we know that 2 to the 2 equals 4. So we need to change the first 2 zeros in the subnet mask to 1. So now we're going to change the subnet mask. Remember, in a Class C, the default's /24, if we're going to add two ones, it becomes slash 26. So if we do slash 26, it comes out to 255, 255, 255, 192. So we have all ones, all ones, all ones, and then we stole two ones, and then we have 6 zeros. So we took the 24, we added two ones. This will give us 4 networks. So how many hosts in each network? Let's do the host formula. So to figure out the host, we use the host formula. We know there are 32 bits in a subnet mask, and 26 of them are ones because we have a slash 26, which is the number of ones. So if we just do 32 minus 26, we get 6. So 2 to the 6, so y becomes 6. So 2 to the 6 minus 2 is 62. So we can have 62 usable addresses in each of the 4 networks. All right, so now that we figured out the network and host portions, or the network and host formulas, let's do the range chart. So remember, with the range chart, we just take this part, 2 to the 6, and we skip the rest. So 2 to the 6 is 64. So we start at 0, we add 64, we add 64, we add 64, we add 64, and eventually we hit 256. Again, if you don't hit 250, if you hit 254 or 258, you did something wrong somewhere. Your math is wrong. So that's the whole left side of our chart. Then if I subtract 1 and move it to the right, so 256 minus 1 is 255, 192 minus 1, this should be 191. I gotta quit smoking crack. And then 128 minus 1 is 127. 64 minus 1 is 63. It's very easy. Now we can slap that in our chart, 0, 64, 128, and this should have been 192. Oh, I can't even fix that either. But now that we have our chart, I add 1 to 0, and I subtract 1 from this side. So if I add 1 from the left, and I subtract 1 from the right, I get 1 and 62. And that fills in the middle, and then I just pop in the rest of the stuff, and everything works out. So pretty easy, huh? So they will always give you the information you need. You just need to know where to look. They're always going to start with a question that's asked, and they'll always give you the number of networks needed or the number of hosts needed, or they start you with the new subnet mask. So let's try one from all 3 different angles. So let's say they give you the number of hosts. They say you start with 192.168.100.0/24, and you need to give me 50 hosts per network. So we know we need to start with the host formula because they ask for host. So we do 2 to the y minus 2 equals 50, and that's what we have to solve. Because they told us the answer is we need to solve 50 hosts, and we already know the formula, so it's easy to pop that stuff into place. All right, some of these, there is no perfect solution. So in this case, we can't get to 50. We can only get to 2 to the 5 minus 2 gives me 30. 2 to the 6 minus 2 gives me 62. We can't do 2 to the 5.5 or anything like that. So you just have to make the solution, I guess, happy. So if I owe you $50 and I give you 30, you're not going to be happy. If I owe you $50 and I give you $62, you are going to be happy. So you always have to give them more than they need if you can't hit the perfect spot. So in this case, we're going to have to do 2 to the 6, which is going to give us 62 hosts. So now that we know it's 2 to the 6, we know that that means we're going to have 6 zeros in the subnet mask. 6 zeros in the subnet mask. So if I take 32 minus 6, I get 26. So then if 6 of them are zeros, then 26 of them have to be ones. So now I figured out the new subnet mask is /26. Then I can fill out my range chart, and I still have the wrong one listed there, and it's a picture, so I can't change that number, sorry. So hopefully you're seeing a pattern here. Now, there are only 6 range charts you can have. You can only have, like, you know, a slash, oh crap, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. You can't have a /31 because that gives you no usable hosts, and you can't have a /32 because that's all ones and there's no host portions at all. So there are only 6 range charts in a Class C address. And those range charts are, range of, actually there's a range of 2 that you can have as well. I'm sorry, you can't have 2 ranges. So it's only a range of 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. Those are the only range charts you can have. You can't have a range chart of 255 because then you don't have a Class C, you're not subnetting anything. So if you're taking notes, or you're doing an exam for class, or if you're going to the to take the exam, you can actually knock these out. You know, at first, you know, when the exam starts, you can just start knocking out your range charts and write them down, so you remember them. Or in class, you can have those in your notes if you're allowed to use notes on your exam. All right, so what if they give you the new subnet mask? So they say you have 192.168.100.0 and you have a mask of /27. So it depends on what they ask you next, but let's work out the entire thing. So they might say something like you have this and a mask of 27. How many usable hosts can you have? Or how many networks could you have? Stuff like that. So again, it all depends on what they ask you, but if you knock out the entire thing, you're going to be able to answer any question. So we know it's a Class C, so the default mask is /24. And then they said it's now /27, so they added 3 ones to it. So this gives us the number of networks. So now we go to the network formula, 2 to the x. X is 3. So, because they added 3 ones, so we know it's 8, so we can have 8 networks. /27 means we have 5 zeros, so it's 2 to the 5 minus 2. 2 to the 5 is 32 minus 2 gives us 30, so we know we have 30 usable hosts in each address. And then we figure out the range. We just take 2 to the 5, which is 32, so we know the range is 32. So remember, that range formula is just 2 to the y, no minus 2. We just cut off that part. So again, as long as you know those 3 formulas, 2 to the x, x is number of ones added to the default subnet mask, 2 to the y minus 2, y is number of zeros in the subnet mask, and then 2 to the y, which is just gives you your range. So now that we know the range is 32, we can fill out the left side. So 0, add 32, add 32, add 32, add 32, add 32, and eventually we'll hit 256. Once we do that, we just subtract 1 from the right side. So 256 minus 1 is 255, and then 224 minus 1 is 223, 192 minus 1 is 191, 160 minus 1 is 159. So now we have the left and right side of our charts, and we can pop them in. Now that we have the left and right side, we can add the middle. So 0, 1, and then this is going to be 30, because we're going to subtract 1 from the left side, or the right side, and put it here. This, we would subtract 1, this would be 62, this would be 94, 126, 158, 190, you get the idea. So pop that in. Then all we have to do is add the 192.168.100, because remember, those first 3 octets in the Class C will always stay the same. So we can pop those in, and then we would pop them in here and here, and we'd be all set. So let's work out a few more just so you've got some practice. All right, so let's do this one. So 192.168.100.0 is what you're given, and they want you to break it down into 5 networks. So what do you do? All right, forgive my handwriting because it's so bad on these little tablets. I'm trying to get used to them. So I have 192.168.100.0 with a /24, so I need 5 networks. So they give you networks, so we know right away that we have to figure out the formula for networks. So we're going to do 2 to the x equals 5. So how do we get to 5? Well, if we do 2 to the 1, we get 2. If we do 2 to the 2, we get 4. If we do 2 to the 3, we get 8. So we can't really get 5. We can get 4 or 8. So if I owe you $5, are you happy if I give you 4? No. If I owe you $5 but I give you 8, are you happy? Yes. So we're going to change this to 2 to the 3 equals 8, because we can't do 5. So we're going to add 3 ones, so 24 plus 3 is 27. So our new subnet mask is a /27. All right, then if we have 27 ones, we know that a subnet mask is 32 bits, minus 27 for ones, that gives us 5 zeros. So now we've knocked out kind of both of our, well, we have the second formula is 2 to the 5 for the zeros minus 2. So 2 to the 5 is 32 minus that gives us 30. So we can have 8 networks, and each network would have 30 hosts. And this actually takes us back to that range chart there, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Remember, there's only 6 range charts in a Class C. So as long as you have the range charts down, you know, just put them with the 0, 1, 30, and 31. So if you just do them like that without the other 3 octets, you can have those range charts and pop them in wherever you need. All right, so let's say they give it to you another way. So they say, hey, you get 192.168.100.0/24, and you need 75 hosts per network. Well, how do you work that out? Well, again, the exact same way. So if this is what I start out with and I need 75 hosts, I need to figure out the host formula, which is going to be 2 to the y minus 2 gives me 75 or more. Now, if you do this long enough, you'll start to know these powers of 2 by heart. So 2 to the 6 gives me 64. 2 to the 7 gives me 128. So then I have to ask myself, if I owe you $75 and I give you 64, you're not going to be happy. If I owe you 75 and I give you 128, you will be happy, so I'm going to use this one. So if there are 32 bits in a subnet mask, and I know that 7 of them are zeros, then 25 have to be ones. So my new slash notation is slash 25. And we know a slash 25 adds 1, so the network formula would be 2 to the 1, which gives us 2. So we would use the 2 network subnet or range chart. So it's that kind of it's that simple. And again, because 2 to 7 is 128, we know we would have 0, and then 128. 128 plus 128 is 256. So then this would be 255, and this would be 127. So that gives me my left and right side, and then I would just have to fill in the middle, and I got too many columns there because I'm terrible. All right, there's a website called subnettingquestions.com, and they'll give you a lot of practice. So they give you questions, and then you can just hit the button, and they'll show you the answer. You can kind of see if you're right. So this is the kind of question they'll ask you. What subnet does host 192.168.76.178? And then here's the subnet mask. Where does he belong? So let's figure out that one. All right, so here's what they give us. So you have 192.168.76.178 on a host. And your subnet mask is a slash 25 because they gave it to us in long form and decimal 255.255.255.128, but we know that the 128 means we've added 1 to the subnet mask, so we just do a slash 25. So now you just kind of work your magic and create the range chart, and you can figure out where this is. So we know that there are 32 bits in a subnet mask, and if 25 of them are ones, then 7 of them have to be zeros. So now we know we know we've added 1 to for the networks. We know we have 7 zeros in the subnet mask. So now we just need to do our range chart. So our range chart is 2 to the y. So our 2 to the y is 7. Y is 7. So we do 2 to the 7 gives us 128. So our range chart starts at 0, so 0, and then 128, and then 256. This would be 255. This would be 127. And if I do a line, and there would be stuff in the middle. So this would be 1 and 126. This would be 129 and 254. So we're trying to match this number, that number, 178. So where does 178 fall? In which range? Well, it falls in this range here because it's between 129 and 254. So what subnet does he belong in? He belongs in the 128 subnet. So the answer would be 192.168.76.128. That's his subnet. So when they ask you what subnet do you belong in, you give them the subnet ID, which is really the name of the network. Remember, that's what we use for routing purposes. So again, as long as you can make a range chart, you can answer any question they give you. They might give you something like this, where they say, what does it belong to? Or they may say, hey, if this is my IP address, what would be the first usable? Or if this is my IP address, what would be my broadcast? And again, you just pop out the range chart and you're all set. Now, because you were so kind and you actually watched this video and got this far, here's some bonus. Your subnet mask can only contain the following numbers in the last octet. You can only have, so the fourth octet can only be 0, 128, 192, 224, 240, 248, 252, or 255. So those are the only numbers in the last octet of the subnet mask. You can't have 223. It just doesn't work that way because it's all ones followed by all zeros. So if I have no ones, if I have 1 1, if I have 2 1s, 3 1s, 4 1s, 5 1s, 6 1s, 7 1s. Oh, actually there should be a 254 here for 7 1s. Yeah. So those are the only numbers you can have in your subnet mask, and this would be 8 1s. So if I have a 0, there's no subnetting. If I have a 128, we subnet with a network of 2. If I have a 192, it's a subnet of 4. If I have 224, I have 8 networks. So then it's very easy to figure out your charts because you just know the first chart is 128, the second chart is 192, the third chart is 224, and you have your network sizes. So again, that's also something that you can just kind of like write down and kind of as a quick helper thing. So when you're taking the CCNA, you can just, as soon as you start the exam, you can just write this down real quick. So you can actually write out something like this here, just the numbers. So if I have 128 in the last octet of the subnet mask, I would have 2 networks. And if I have 192, I would have 4 networks. 224 gives me 8 networks. 240 gives me 16 networks. And 248, but so you get the idea. So you can kind of just have, if you memorize that, just that part, it's very easy to knock that out and figure out like what they're asking or which range chart to use. And then here's an example of this, again, just subnettingquestions.com. So what valid host range is the IP address blah 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 part of? So if I write this out, we get 192.168.239.150, and they give you the subnet mask of /25 because they said 255.255.255.128. And then they're asking you, what is the valid host range? So we know we've added 1 to the default subnet mask. And we know if we have 32 bits in a subnet mask and 25 of them are 1s, then 7 of them have to be 0s. So we know it's the formula, or for our range, is 2 to the 7, which gives us 128. So we have 0, 128, and we can just do 255 and 127. So we know it's a Class C address, and if it's a Class C address, this is what we're looking for, the 4th octet. In a Class C, we do all the stuff in the 4th octet. Now, it gets more complicated in Class B because then it could be the 3rd or the 4th octet. But we only work in 1 octet. And the subnet mask kind of shows us which one. Whatever number in the subnet mask is not 0 and it's not 255, that's the octet that we're going to work in. So in this case, where does the 150 fall into? Well, obviously 150 would fall into this range here. So this would be what, 129 to 254. So then we bring up this, and we say, give me the answer. So 129, 254. So boom, it's that easy, folks. So as always, if you have any questions, make sure you let me know. Again, you need to practice this a few times. Go to subnettingquestions.com, knock some of those out, fill out your range charts, and boom, and you're all set. So have a great day.